everyone. Welcome back to the latest episode of We've All Done It. I say this every time, and I mean it every single time, but I am truly elated for our guest today. Ethan and I have the most interesting conversations ever, and I'm so excited. We're going to capture one today. I know we captured one on his podcast recently, but we're capturing one for us today. And I think you guys are going to enjoy everything we say because we're just brilliant people. Wouldn't you agree, Ethan?
Completely.
So let's start at the most important place. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Wonderful. Well, first of all, Kimberly, thank you for having me on your program. It is an honor. Tell you about myself. So I made the foolish decision to go to business school, get an MBA, then spent 20 years in corporate America leading marketing and sales teams. Experienced quite a bit of corporate dysfunction, toxicity, however you want to label it. And I had a life-defining moment in 2007 to 2008, where I had spent a year heading up the marketing for a cable company in New York City. I had grown their revenue about 40% the year that I was there. And my reward was that I and 15,000 other people were laid off.
So you did your job too well.
Well, perhaps. What it was is, and you know this, we've talked about this, big company A talking to big company B about merging. In advance of merging, make your financials look really good. So what is the knee-jerk reaction to most corporations? Layoffs and cost reduction. So I was one of those 15,000. I then spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about what do you do next? And everything kept coming back to not wanting to go back and do the same thing over and over again, which was find another job, do what I was doing in some different iteration. And I had this life-changing moment of complete epiphany, and I started my own consulting practice in 2009. And just for everybody out there, I do three things and have been for 15 years: employee training and development, leadership team coaching. And the thing that you and I talked about on my podcast that I'm really passionate about is organizations finally willing to embrace workplace culture transformation to create great places to work. And that's what I've been doing for 15 years. Those three aspects of unleashing people's untapped potential.
Oh, yes. And that is by far, I would say, the thing I enjoy talking to you about the most, other than foreign travel. Just because our perspectives are slightly different, but in how we think about cultural transformation. So I want to get into this a little bit. So why is that such a passion for you? Like, why did you hone in on that particular element? Because you've got other things that you offer, but what is it about that is so special?
It is the single greatest opportunity for organizations to achieve a number of competitive advantages, really lasting competitive advantage. The first is when people tell me, business owners or executives, there's a war on talent. No, actually there isn't. Because places that have this reputational brand as being a great place to work, they don't have any issue getting the most talented people coming to them.
Yeah.
The second is financially. Organizations, and we know this now, anecdotally as well as from a methodological standpoint, we've got 40, 50 years of organizational development research that says if you create a great place to work, if you empower your people financially, you're going to outperform your competitors. I mentioned to you, that's what my second book is all about.
Mm-hmm.
But from the people standpoint, I'm passionate about culture because this is what I experienced in corporate. Organizations need to, and are now thankfully starting to rethink the relationship, the employee-employer relationship. When you create a great place to work, your people, because of how they're treated, respected, they're valued, they perform and produce at a higher level, which then drives organizational profitability, which therefore means both parties derive significant benefit, and it's lasting. We know that it's lasting. Once you create a great place to work, there's all these benefits that whether it's a 5-person graphic design firm or a multinational corporation with 100,000 employees, the culture wins. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I mean, you've heard this all before. I've been
Yeah.
spending 15 years dedicated to trying to get organizations to think about culture. Because once you build a great place to work, the organization, but also the people benefit. And I also think 99 out of 100 companies have no idea what culture means.
Well, and that's where I was gonna. This probably will dovetail into that because my first thought is if company know, like if your employees are happy, because let's be honest, there's a reason we do engagement surveys 1 to 2 times a year, whether or not that you and I agree that those are actually accurate metrics of how engaged a culture is. But clearly somebody realizes it's important because they're measuring it, right? So companies don't spend money on things that they don't think will matter. So they know engagement matters. So why do you think it is that companies continue to do things that will kill the culture? So one of the things I'm thinking about right now are all of these big boy companies that are demanding the return to office policies. So if they know that these are completely unfavorable, they know it's going to kill morale, they know it's going to kill engagement. What is it? Is it just that C-suites don't really appreciate the value of culture, or is it that they appreciate the culture, they just don't care enough? Like I'm trying to figure out for myself, like why are they like making choices that are so against what employees say make them the most productive, happiest, healthiest employee they could have?
So the short answer is yes. Meaning both.
Yeah,
Why can't both be true?
yeah.
That and I use the term in this instance liberally, leadership, the way you just framed it, is operating under two oppositional or two different mindsets. One is they understand conceptually the value of having a dedicated, empowered, engaged workforce, but they just don't care if their people are happy. And then also, they have no understanding of the monetary value of what an amazing culture can contribute. And I'll explain that out. I've been spending the last 15 years trying to explain to organizations that there is a way to monetarily measure the value of your culture. And I mean, I have a proprietary process. I do a workforce, autonomy study upfront when I do a consult. I do an assessment, the 360-degree assessment of all the stakeholders. I look at how truly engaged or disenfranchised their people are. But there's a way to measure this. And I don't think organizations care about their people enough to make this significant change, or I don't think they're necessarily comfortable, even if they are inclined to care about their people. They don't know how to move forward. And it can be almost overwhelming, right? How do you completely transform a culture? But I think what you just said is absolutely important. It's both. It's a little bit of both, which is why I spend so much time working with organizations to literally give them low-hanging fruit, the things you can do pretty easily. And then as we kind of get deeper, we really get to the core of what is culture. And by the way, it's not always just necessarily happy employees.
Oh, explain.
And I also
Say
don't
more.
agree. You and I both, we agree to disagree on what the value of an assessment is, but I think you and I are absolutely lockstep in our philosophy or methodology of you can't change what you don't measure.
Correct.
And so much of my work, all of my coaching methodology, 6 boxes, DDI, DISC. I'm a Goldman Sachs 10,000 small businesses coach. I'm a Kaufman Foundation business growth coach. Everything I do in my consulting is predicated on measurable employee work productivity outputs.
So give me an example, because I have some in mind, but I want to hear what you say. So when you say I give them low hanging fruit, so things that they can start to see some incremental shift, what would be some of the most common things that, when you say, if there's a leader out there who's listening, like what are some of those small things that maybe leaders take for granted that would be considered in that low hanging fruit space?
The notion of infusing or embedding your core values into your business strategy and processes. I'll give you an example. Recently, an organization out in the Midwest, a multinational healthcare organization, I was talking to some of their chief happiness executives, and they said that they live their
Wait,
values.
their title was Chief Happiness?
There's a, they were a team collectively who were responsible for employee happiness.
Wow. Okay.
That's
I
another.
haven't
That's
actually heard that one
another.
before, so I had to ask.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, that's another symbolic gesture of we're seeing the gradual 21st century transformation of workplaces around people-centric culture, and
Interesting.
oftentimes it's lip service because they give these people great titles, they talk about making great changes, and it doesn't reach the employee. So
Yeah.
here's an example of manifesting low-hanging fruit on how to reach your people. So I was talking to this organization, and they said, we live our values. And after literally a few sessions of me speaking to their clients, their competitors, their employees, members of their board, there was no way in hell they were being consistently honest about living their values. So one of the things I said was, one of your values is collaboration. And they said, yes. I said, so how come every week when you do your weekly team meetings, on your meeting, agenda, the first item is, let's go around the table, this is on a team basis, and talk about what we did last week that manifested or grew team collaboration. And it's literally watching people's literally face melt when they realize that their practices that they're doing, maybe unconsciously, are not only not helping to build a great workplace culture, it's creating those things you and I talked about, which is people checking out emotionally, quiet quitting, people updating their resumes and seeing greener pasture, people not committing their authentic full selves to their work. And it really stems from the fact that organizations still don't understand the power that comes from giving up control, right? And giving
Yeah.
up control and giving it to your people. Because guess what? Deep down, deep down, they don't trust their employees enough to allow their employees to decide when they work, where they work from, who they work with, and how they in fact do their own work. I mean, isn't it kind of silly that the people who are doing their work don't get to decide how to do it most productively?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's old. That's a component, I think, to some of the return to work, return to office stuff. Just because I find it fascinating that when we needed to be productive, like when we shifted to the virtual space, because I think this is the best example, the productivity on my team skyrocketed because immediately you had no commutes. You weren't having people were just eating at home. They weren't having to leave their desk to go out to get lunch somewhere. Were there costs, right? So, well, like there wasn't as much like drama around the cooler. You know what I mean? Like people weren't congregating and spending like half an hour. They weren't blowing time doing things that may create great friendships, but weren't actually contributing to work. So
Right.
productivity went up. People actually were happier. And there's some research out there, and I can't think of who did it, but I'd have to go back and look, that showed, particularly from our minority population, they enjoyed work a lot more because they had to deal with less microaggressions in the office. And you have some people that just get easily distracted or frustrated or not able to do their best work, especially in the cube environment, because someone's constantly coming by or whatever. So I always giggle a little bit when I hear the return to office policies are because productivity is not where it could be and because we're not creating the right culture.
Right.
And I
And
often think that that's usually that's an excuse because you can
for
create
sure.
great culture if you actually know how to, regardless of where your employees are.
And I think this is really fundamentally a really critical point now. And you and I really so appreciate you kind of talking through this. I think that there is absolutely not and has never been a one size fits all approach to unleashing people's potential. I think the other thing is pre-COVID, post-COVID, you meet every individual where she or he or they need to be. And I'll give you an example of that. Gen Zs these days are all fill in the blank. Talk about a lazy way to stereotype one of the 5 functional working generations. Gen Zs are not unique to themselves the way millennials are not, the way Gen
Yeah.
Xers, matures boomers. Here's what bothers the hell out of me. To say that Gen Zs, love technology, they love the face to screen, they don't want to come into the office. That's bull. And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. Case in point, my daughter, Karina, who's 24. She went through her college collegiate experience because of COVID virtual. She had very little as an extroverted introvert. She needed the interaction, never got it. She gets out of college, first job, they mail her the laptop and say, here's your onboarding. My daughter needed the water cooler. My daughter needed to
Yeah.
see how people in a professional environment, she needed to have a coach or mentor on hand. She needed to have a boss who she could walk into her office or even hear the dynamic. Because guess what? That cubicle stuff, that's actually culture. And she missed it, which is why she left the PR firm she works for
Yeah.
and went to a direct competitor.
Yeah. It's funny you say
Because
that because one of the young, somebody that I hired, she's young, she's still in her mid-20s. She was on my team. And after we had, and so I want to say this, I think stereotypes, we've got to stop them. If I could tell you how, like, some of the hardest working people I have ever hired in my life are Gen Zs and millennials. And I'm talking brilliant, smart, hardworking. I never saw laziness ever in them, which is so every time I hear that, it just drives me absolutely, excuse my, like batshit crazy. It's not about the generation, it is about the person. So I just want to
thank
put it
you.
there.
But just to jump in, which is why when I talk about culture, one of the things I do that organizations, you asked kindly about low-hanging fruit. I literally say, I want to see your talent acquisition. I want to see your recruiting, interviewing, onboarding processes, because there is a way that organizations can very intelligently change their recruiting process to conduct behavioral interviews to get to the heart of what you just said. Understand who she, he, or they are as a candidate in terms of their characteristics, their personality, their preferred working style, their effective communication style, and then hire for great, like you said, hardworking, all these other great attributes. And then your responsibility as a world-class organization, a great place to work, is to train them on the job. Because you and I both know 6 or 9 months later, because of the technology transformation, their job is going to be outdated in less than a year anyway. So don't recruit for stereotypes, recruit for rock star candidates.
Well, and it's funny because in order to recruit the right people, you actually have to know what kind of culture you want to hire for. And sometimes because you and I have talked about this, like how many companies you've gone into and they have their values and that stuff plastered all over the walls, but they're not actually lived. And so one of the things I was thinking about is, a question that came to mind when I was thinking about talking with you today was, where do you think culture comes from? Do you think it's a bottom up, top down, a little bit of both? How does a company decide what their culture is?
And that's the gazillion-dollar question. And I think, as usual, I mean, you tackled it perfectly. It's a multi-dimensional organic thing, but I think it comes in terms of creating the structure around what it is, your values, your vision, your mission, your code of conduct and behavior. All of that is architected by the leadership team. And then, as you said, once you look for people who exhibit those desirable attributes that you want the culture to be infused with, and you start bringing them in, you give them everything that they need. And this is where my consulting is really oriented to.
Yeah.
Giving people the resources, and that's a whole bunch of stuff, so that they can shine. Then the culture manifests through the interaction of people. But if you ask 100 people what their definition of culture is, they'll give you over 100 answers. But in its most beautiful, simplistic, elegant form, organizational culture is how people interact and behave together day in and day out. Yeah. And, no framed picture on the wall, no list of values is going to be how they interact. But you also do need culture brand ambassadors. You need VIPs. You need people who are very well respected in the organization to model or pattern that behavior. And it's not always top down, by the way. But one of the most destructive things you can do as an organization, reward people who manifest toxic behaviors to keep people who thrive on conflict and chaos and instigating interpersonal dynamic strife, or reward people who maybe they're rainmakers, top sales performers, who do not practice and live the values that are desirable for your culture.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Because I was sitting there, I was like listening, and I've been in situations where you have an executive team that has very bold, big ideas, and they think the organization is one thing. But once you get down past that top tier, what culture really is what's happening on the lower level. Like it's what, to your point, it's what people are living day in and day out. And I say that's a lot of what I do too, is the sense of you will kill it the minute you tolerate one leader, one toxic, whatever, drama-filled, one leader who is not living the culture. Right. You are sending the message that that is acceptable behavior. Right. And then all those people who are underneath that leader realize, well, that's what needs to happen to be successful. Right. Well, if they're not shutting it down, so that must be okay. And then it's the fester that happens. I've seen this happen to companies where that comes in, and because it's not addressed quickly and efficiently and publicly, like being transparent that this is not who we are. Man, it's just companies just end up drowning themselves by allowing that kind of disease to exist and grow.
You need to cauterize the wound. You need to address it before the cancer metastasizes. But there's another component of this that a lot of times my clients aren't aware of, that I have to educate them on. Not only is culture something that we do have the ability to exert influence over in terms of our senior leadership team, the way our people act. So that's something that we can kind of move the levers. But there's something that's a little bit more rigid in terms of culture transformation, which I work on, which is the notion of, they have this thing called the command control pyramid. It was created in the 1800s to facilitate industrial revolution, which is you've got the three levels of senior leadership, middle management, and frontline staff. And that's been enculturized into our way of doing business as kind of a control metric where we consolidate power at the top, we diffuse it down as needed. And the people at the bottom who are living day in and day out, who are acting your culture, there's this tremendous disconnect. And the implicit assumption was middle management was going to be the communicators up and down. Mm-hmm. And that's dead. I explain to my clients, whether it's an entrepreneurial firm here in New York City or it's a multinational in Singapore, I explain to them that my work is going to be to shrink that pyramid in layers of bureaucracy and create what we call now a matrix or flatter organization, that instead of C-suite middle management, we have project-driven teams. And then every time there's a new initiative, it's led by a project lead or two leads. And they can be senior or junior, it doesn't matter. It's the aggregate skill set of bringing that necessary team together. But you can't do that in this world. And that's why that's dying, thank God.
I think it's going to die a slow death. I don't see that. I don't see a lot of organizations because there's just too many people. It doesn't serve them to embrace that kind of
but
dynamic.
But those are not the organizations I want to work with. And the beauty of that is, on my podcast, I interview people at these places that are now great places to work, that literally 40, 50, 60 years ago when they were founded on these models of treating people differently. And my go-to is always Patagonia, but it's Nucor Steel and DuPont and Gore. And there are so many organizations out there of various sizes and different industries who have thrown away that command control model. And you're right. It's going to be a long time before this is universally accepted. But at least what gets me so excited every day is I'm seeing this now. I'm seeing the groundswell. More and more conversations I'm having with executives and business owners are around issues they're having with culture. It used to be strategy. And you and I both know if you have a horrible, horrible workforce and a great strategy, nothing gets done. Yep. It used to be strategy and operational efficiency. Everybody's got AI and ChatGPT and EOS, and the technology is a universal equalizer. Well, if your strategy can't put you forward and your operations can't make you number one, how will I possibly become a financial top performing player in my space? Oh shit, they're called people.
Well, and I think the shift that's going to happen, and it goes back, I think, to generations, right? So you cannot deny that most of the companies that are pulling people back are still being led by older white males
Men.
that, I still think harken back that they know what worked for them, and they want to, like, they think that that's the only way you can do it.
Right.
Or that may not be their full motive, but I do think that's some of the motive as well. But I think as we continue to see a shift into even the Gen Xers, where you're going to see more women coming up, you're going to see more people of color coming into play that demand a different way of doing business, because we realize
Right.
that you can do business in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be this way. And I think that that's a very scary paradigm shift for a lot of people. But I also think that is going to drive. And again, when we talk about generations, I think this younger generation, the one called Gen Alpha, the one that's now in school, that's going to be high school coming into college, where they really have never known a world without, a device. In like, so for them, it's like the way that they view work, what I will say just in broad terms, work is so different than any other generation before. I think that that is going to force a shift in not only how we do business, but how we treat people within the organization. And so I'm kind of excited to see it. I think I think it's scary for a lot of people who know status quo, but I think that's ultimately what's going to drive us forward. And it's going to be the companies that can figure out how to leverage the strength
Yep.
of these new
Yep.
generations and this shift, I think, are going to be the ones that will sustain long term. And
And
I don't
and
know if
just
I
I'm
know,
sorry.
I'm sure some big CEOs would disagree with me.
Well, but does it
But I
really
think that's
matter
the
whether?
truth.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter whether they disagree, because what you said is absolutely the core of what's going on in American business and industry. So, this is why I wrote The Compassionate Organization back in 2018. What you just said, amen, sister, is what we're seeing every day is boomers and matures. So first of all, just for everybody to kind of understand conceptually, matures born before World War II and boomers born between 45 and 64, they're leaving the workforce, right?
Yeah.
Thousands and thousands every day. And as you said, the two fastest growing generational segments of our workforce are millennials born between 80 and 96 and Gen Zs born between 96 and 2010. They have collectively, those two, but especially Gen Zs, a fundamentally different perspective on work, the relationship between employee and employer, their expectations and demands. Now, you and I and those old fat white dudes can argue about Gen Zs and their expectations being unreal and whatever, but they are in the process of becoming the largest segment of our workforce. And therefore, organizations who want to create a great place to work, and I coach them, is to create a environment in which all five generations, not the alphas, who, by the way, were born after 2010, so the oldest ones are now like 14, 15.
Yeah, they're
But
in
the
high
other,
school. They're not far.
no, they're not that far. They're ready to have summer internships. And by the way, do you have a really, really enlightened summer intern program? I mean, one of the things I did that was wise 15 years ago when I started consulting in this was I started teaching aggressively in what's now 10 colleges and universities. And I've taught over 5,000 students. And I understand, I think, a little bit more insightfully what Gen Zs are looking for. And part of creating a culture is understanding the differences between the generations, accommodating them, but at the same time, encouraging them through your culture and your values to work collaboratively.
Yeah.
And that's really, I was going to say before, that the largest component of my consulting is I'm asked to re-architect the experience between the five generations. That's the fun stuff.
Can I just call out for snarky purposes that Gen X is still left out of the conversation, being a member of
We
Gen
have to
X.
be. We have to be because
I'm
we are
so
the
sorry.
we're those people born between LBJ and MTV, 64 and 80. But we're, I mean, Kimberly, we're the universal translators. We're the
Yeah.
ones who get them to play nicely in the
Yeah.
sandbox. And you know what? I think it's because we were latchkey kids. We grew up with we grew up with still
Yeah.
television, radio as broadcast media, but we were the first that started to evolve into digital media and social. So
I think it's
we're just
because and this is how I always thought of it, is because I understand what the world was like for them because I lived in that time, but I also fully understand what the world is like now because I live in this time. And so I can understand what is amazing to miss about the days when I didn't have a cell phone and I could get on my bike and ride all day and nobody knew where I was. There's some brilliance to that, but there's also some brilliance to the connectivity that we do have and the way we can connect to each other. So I do think that that is the brilliance of Gen X. I'm just going to call it out because I feel that's so funny that Gen X
so
always,
much.
we always complain we're the forgotten generation.
But what you're saying is we are so enlightened. We are so enlightened as a generation that we have the ability to just organically look to what's best in everybody.
Well, and I think that again, how to leverage that brilliance as well in understanding, because that was always my thing is I never looked at people who were on my team or people I was hiring based on what their age was. I was always interested in how curious they were, how energetic they were, why were they interested in where they wanted to be? How did they handle ambiguity? How did they handle, you know, um, conflict, because ultimately it doesn't matter which generation you are. If you can't navigate the complexities of a work environment or whatever it is you're doing, that team is going to struggle. So, because I had different ages, and yeah, that's why I always tell people, anytime somebody tries to trash the younger generations, it's usually something that's not based in reality, or it's
And
such an
it's
odd example of
yeah,
that. I just
it
think it's
it it
unnecessary.
shows a lack of natural curiosity and a myopic view of the world, and it also shows an incredible inability to see what's best in people. I mean, the notion of I'm a communications guy, so
Yeah.
stereotyping was when we had the printing presses. You would take the different letters that were the same, put them in different boxes, and you'd line them up and put the ink and roll them under the press. That's stereotyping. We artificially put people into categories
Yeah.
for the purposes of not having to get to know them individually. And
Yeah.
what you just said you do when you're constructing teams, that's the beauty of organizations that understand an enlightened culture is you spend time and effort learning what the individual, what she wants or needs, and what her strengths are and what
Yeah.
her challenges are individually, so that you can create. By the way, from day one, when somebody's being onboarded, your orientation should literally on the first day assign them a coach, assign them a mentor. And what I also do is I build out a project plan for them on their orientation. That's day one of their first year career professional development planning process. But you got to do this, maybe not because it's altruistic and you care about everybody, because Gen Zs and millennials demand it.
Well, and again, it comes back to if you want the best talent, then you're going to have to figure out how to not only get them, but keep them.
And
And
that's true. That's why one of the things we do when we talk about culture from a people strategy standpoint of creating an HR flow process is it starts with what are the attributes you're looking for when you're recruiting. So
yeah,
one of the first things I'll do is I'll ask an organization if they recruit using job descriptions. And they look at you like you have three heads. And they go, of course we do. And I go, well, that's really the 20th century and that's dead. And they go, what do you mean? How do you find candidates who are great candidates without a job description? You need the roles and responsibilities. And I look at them and I go, okay, why? Because we have to know what are the 5 or 8 roles that they're performing. Why? What do you mean, why? And I go, but in your whole process, you've never once identified how to find people who are naturally curious, problem solvers, critical thinkers, intrinsically motivated. They haven't demonstrated leadership at all. They're not They haven't lived or studied abroad. They don't come from a culturally diverse background. I mean, those are the things you should be looking for and recruiting for. And once they come in, fostering a continuous way of allowing them to shine. Like you said, really great people, they're not going to stay very long in an organization with a very subpar culture.
Well, I think part of the problem is that when you're looking at approaching new talent, so much today is AI driven, right? So you need the job description so you can run all these resumes through the filter. And, you know, the thing that my poor recruiter that I worked with, I just always took it out of their hands because whatever tool, whatever they created, always ended up with the worst candidates that I would look through and I'd say, this has nothing to do with my job. Like this candidate is not great. Can you send me all the resumes? And they're like, it's a lot. I'm like, send them anyway. And then what I found was is that I would end up picking candidates that the filter system would have never got. Because it didn't, an AI generated tool, and I get that we can make them smarter, but there's something that we're missing. And I think that's kind of what you're coming back to is
Yep.
we cannot remove the human experience element from how we identify and place talent. We can't outsource that to a computer. A computer will never understand.
Well, and that isn't that what this is all about, is the notion of, are we going to allow the technology, the ATS, the applicant tracking systems, and the algorithms and the matching of keywords and resumes and what percent matching schema? How the hell are you going to bring people into an organization? An organization, by the way, is a living, breathing entity that, whether it's 5 employees, again, or 50,000, it's living, breathing. Yeah. It's a humanistic project. And you're going to use algorithms and software to determine who's the best candidate. I'll give you a perfect example, and this really, really pisses me off. Recruiting for, let's say, hedge funds, private equity firms, all those scummy organizations. What they do is they go to the same well. They go, we're going to go to the same colleges and universities, whatever they are. Typically, they're the same. Sometimes one falls out of favor. They say, we're going to go for the same majors, with the same dual minors, with the same 6.0, because everything's grade inflated GPAs. We're going to search for the same candidates. And all of a sudden, they've reconstituted the culture and the essence of who they are to be Harvard or Duke or whomever. Who's not getting in that algorithm or ATS, or like you said, candidate matching software? The students I taught, who were first generation college students, their family said, don't you dare go to college. We need you in our dry cleaner. You're going to go pay for it yourself. Oh, you're going to take care of your grandparents because you're the eldest sibling, and you're going to take care of your other siblings. They get a 2.8 at this school that I won't say which one they taught at. They are never considered for the best jobs when they graduate. They've already been pre-filtered out because systemically they've been removed from the consideration process of your candidate recruiting. And guess what? That perpetuates. And the only way to stop doing it is somebody like me come in and say, I need to re-architect this because you're losing this. Who would you rather have? A student with a 4.0 who never, ever, ever had to do any of what I just said, or that student who had a 3.3, but who still did all of that on her own or their own? I mean, to me, that's a rhetorical. There's no doubt.
If everything else is the same, absolutely. Like you want the person who demonstrates that they know how to navigate challenge, hardship, can critically think themselves through a problem.
Time management, overcoming, chaos, overcoming obstacles, intrinsically
especially at
driven.
A young age.
Oh, yeah. Which is why I've never, ever, ever had somebody, when I say, what are the top 2 or 3 things you look for in a male or female or gender non-binary candidate? And they go, what do you mean? I say, do you look for Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts? Eagle Scouts? Why would we do that? There's nothing that speaks to a high school student coming out or a college student coming out than saying, I was in that organization from an early age and I stayed committed, or they were National Honor Society, or they were on debate. I mean, or they were active in their communities. I'd rather have a student who had 3 or 4 summers of volunteering. Doctors Without Border did a gap year.
Yeah. Oh no, I think you and I think very similarly about that. And this
Yeah.
is why everyone, why we have such very passion-filled conversations, just because it matters. All of this matters. I mean, this is what drives, not just drives business, but this is what drives our community, and the health of our community and our just our environment. So I just want to say I'm having a lot of fun. But I know we can't keep you forever. So I just want to ask you one last question before we close, which is, if you were a leader and we'll go smaller. You're a leader, maybe it's a company, maybe it's a team, but you're struggling with this concept of culture.
Mm.
What is the one thing you would encourage them to do or to think about if they're struggling with culture in their team or organization?
Yeah, that's wow.
Like, where do you start?
I think it's a twofold first step. The first is organizationally, what do we want to become? I mean, if we go forward in time to the when we are our most enlightened version of ourselves, what's our legacy? And how do we define it? I mean, how do we really define what our legacy is and what we're working towards? I
Yeah.
mean, and I apologize for my background noise. Tom Shoes, very clearly. Tom Shoes had a very, very clear, Chobani, Kind. They have very clear identities that they literally, I said, this is what we want to strive to become. So that's the first thing. The second is, I would say before you hire anybody else, before you make any decisions about 2025 and your people strategy, literally create an ideal employee profile. And it's
I
not
like this.
function.
This is a good
Yeah,
one.
no, it's not functional. It's not we're looking for a junior associate in a HR department. It's what are the attributes or the characteristics of the people who we have found will enable us to achieve our legacy. And then, by the way, once you architect that ideal employee profile, any hiring decision is literally mapped to, does this person belong in our organization? And that is the epitome of what you asked before. Is
I love that.
That's the low hanging fruit. Is twofold. Who's our ideal employee,
I like that.
and what is our legacy? What do we want to become when all is said and done? And by the way, when you answer that, you've just written your vision statement.
Oh, brilliant. So I love you, Ethan. I always love our conversations. They're so good. This is great though. And I think, I hope that this provides some solid something for our listeners out there. So whether you're a leader or an individual contributor, these are still things like how you show up every day as part of culture. And if you desire to be in leadership, these are important things you have to think through, regardless of what your company does, because you do hire. Like I didn't hire the way most of my companies hired. I had my own approach, and I think that was a huge component to why my teams were so successful and why I had great engagement, is because I didn't think through just, can they do the job? I actually thought through a tremendous amount. And if you talk to any of those employees, they will tell you I was the hardest interviewer. They were all scared shitless, which I still think is very funny to this day, because then they show up and they're like, "You're so nice," and then they were like, "You were so mean in the interview." But the idea being is I needed to see how you would work.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like if how you worked was complementary to the other people on the team
Yeah.
and to the work we were doing, what we were doing wouldn't be as hard. I trusted that your education and that was going to be there. The how mattered a great deal.
Yeah.
So
And
I love
I
that
can't
ideal
imagine
statement.
you
That's
being
great.
I can't imagine you being a tough interview. But I will say the only thing I'll
I
say in
was.
closing then about interviewing is one of the worst things somebody can do during the interview process is say, "What would you do?"
Oh yeah.
And every organization does this, and it's part of their interview script. Please throw that away and
Yes.
instead say, show me a time in which you were faced with this specific challenge that you'll find yourself in this role, and how did you handle it? What was the challenge you faced? What
Yeah.
action did you take? What result did you achieve? And oh, by the way, what did you learn from that?
That you're going, oh, this is a whole nother one we could talk about too, is the whole idea of behavior, situation, outcome. And that we're going to talk about that. We'll do an
Okay.
episode just about that one, because I
Okay.
think that would be helpful. But just thank you so much for coming on. I have loved every second of this, and I appreciate you so tremendously.
Thank you so much, Kimberly.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of We've All Done It. I know your time is valuable. That's why I am for as little BS as possible. Hopefully, today's episode has sparked some new ideas for you. If you would like to learn more about the We've All Done It leadership framework or how to work with me, please check out my website at kimberlyjbenoit.com. Until next time.